Yeah, it's very different once you have kids in the picture. Like it changes the whole game.
Yeah. Now, give us a little bit of background about yourself. I know you're with the best rugby league team in the world, the Mighty Warriors. But before that, give us a little background.
Yeah, cheers. It's been a good journey so far. So I'm, of course, French. I guess my accent has give that away already. But I studied in France, and then after graduating, I was lucky enough to be able to do a bit of research project in out of Victoria University in Melbourne, and that sort of kickstarted my journey of being a French practitioner abroad, going from country to country, and then from a rugby version to other rugby versions. So I've done a few seasons of NRL over at the Sydney Roosters, and then the Warriors. Our first stint at the Warriors a few years back. And then from there, I had a crack at rugby union at home in France in the top 14. And then went over in Russia. At an exciting time for Russia when they could just qualify for the World Cup and there had a lot of things going on. So went over there, tried to set up a few things.
Well, what year were you in Russia?
So that was to 19.
Okay. 2019.
Yeah.
Just trying to think now.
So
was that after Mark Bennett left?
No, Mark Bennett was still over.
He was still there.
Mark Bennett would be the head of performance for the men's 15.
Yeah.
And then I would be performance lead or head of performance, but at federation. So like more looking at like the sevens and then the youth pathway. So 18, under 18, under 20, under 16, going with them to different competition, try to help their sort of like staff.
Dude, now you're in the same city again. You're both in Auckland.
What is that? So
you and Mark are both in Auckland now.
Yeah. Funny enough, I heard. He's been back here for a few years, and I don't want him to think I'm following him. If you ever listen to that, Mark, I'm just not following you. It's just things happen. But yeah, so and then went over to Ireland. I had really good time there over with the Irish Rugby Federation. Like great place, great people. And then just now back at the Warriors. Yeah, so back to the Mighty Warriors, as you said. Just try to crack it there, just finally lift that trophy. But it's been a long time coming now. So,
well, it's been a never coming. I started my strength and conditioning career at the Warriors back in 2011 when I started interning there. And that was the 1 year where they had all three grades when there was under 20s all made the grand final, and it was like the most epic year. And then since then, it was just like. It did not go well after that.
No, I'd say it's very up and down. It's a bit like roller coaster here always. 2011 is probably like the year, like the reference year. So cool. We could live through that bit of success.
It was cool just to be a fly on the wall. But I want to go straight into some of your random thoughts that you've had on LinkedIn, because I've enjoyed them. I've resonated with a lot of them. Had thought through a lot of similar, I guess, thought processes around it. But let's just start with something that the listeners might find a little easier to understand as well. Is your post about power versus elasticity. I'd love for you to kind of go into a little bit on that, on how you kind of see these as two potentially separate qualities.
So like all those random thoughts anyway, they mostly come from, stuff we see on the field. It's not like, spending time and trying to go deep into the philosophy of things. It's just sometimes like we're hit by stuff on the ground, and then you're like, oh, okay, I need to make sense of that and start like putting some notes on paper. And that one is simply like we try here. So the last few years, my approach in the gym's been, I want to have some sort of individualization early on. So I do feel I get it in rugby, especially like there is always that fight between it's a team sport. It requires a lot of connection. It requires a lot of relying on each other and stuff like that. And that's good. And sometimes we want it to be a team sport everywhere around the program. So on the pitch, in the gym, in what we do in recovery and all of that. But I feel like more and more my thoughts are the gym is the place where you need to address what people actually need. And I don't feel like you need to wait for it. As early as you can catch it, then you can act on it. And it doesn't mean you have to have like 35 or 40 different programs, but that's why we sort of tinker around and try to play with what we can do. And last year we mainly did like, we follow up what the boys were producing strength wise. And we play around some isometric testing in and around that, around like what Natera is doing around the speed-specific ISO stuff. But mostly we track, their pure concentric strength, like old school. Rugby league is still fairly old school, so you need a bit of that, like a 3RM, squat, bench, and all of that. And on the other side, we started doing a counter movement rebound jump, and we try to look at reactive strength index, and then as well to sort of eccentric value going to the jump, and try to picture so strength on one side and then reactivity or power on the other side, and group people like that in the gym. But this year we added one layer, which is we started testing at specific velocity on a power exercise, like just a clean pull or unclean pull. And we started seeing some discrepancies. So basically, there is no straight correlation between people who can move a certain weight at a really high velocity and people that can produce high RSI on a jump test, for instance. And that's where that idea sort of began to grow. Is actually, we often almost interchangeably use power and reactivity in our line of work, especially in rugby. Sometimes we're not very precise with vocabulary, and we say, "Oh, that guy is very powerful just because he can jump high or jump fast, or he's very reactive." But that's two different things. And what we started noticing is probably the main difference between those two is in the reactive component, people that are very good with being reactive, they are very good at manipulating their own body weight. They have really good timing and they have really good coordination. And that's a different quality from power. Some people can move some set load with producing a huge amount of power, a huge amount of watts. But when they have to contextualize that activity into something that's more locomotor, more running based or jumping based, they are facing sometimes whether big problem of coordination or rhythm or just the ability to recycle energy that make them not as elastic as other people. And the other way around, you have people who are extremely efficient at restituting elastic energy. So a jump or running, they'll be very, very good as long as the load, external load is quite low. And then as soon as you add load on top of it, then their issue might be a bit of a strength sailing, limiting them. And those guys won't sprint as well if you do a clean, for instance, test or loaded jump, because the external load will trigger some limitation around their actual muscle contractile ability. So yeah, that's sort of how it came up. And then, so where we're at now is we actually try to have a quadrant where we look at people's max strength. And then on top of that, we look at people power ability. We look, at the power they're producing around like an ankle or ankle pull at set weight. So we have sort of like a profile here for the players, like a few different weights we get them to go through, and then their reactivity on the jump. And that probably gives us about like 2 to 3 exercise that would be different depending on the guy's profile at the moment. So yeah, that's a bit the idea behind that.
Do you find certain positions skew to certain qualities within that testing?
Good question. Look, league is a bit like strange sometimes when it comes to position. People have very, very similar needs across. Probably there's still some difference, and but I would say it's less about position that about like people's physiology. Like you can categorize your lab like people who are your fast guy, they're thin, they don't love the gym work, they need a lot of context around what they do, they're good at the skill stuff, they're really passionate about the game, and often those guys end up being quite elastic but quite low in terms of their strength potential. And then on the other side, like when you have guys who are like priding themselves on the strength aspect, they're more like stocky, wide shoulder, very strong in the gym, and often in league they are your middle. So that's probably like one position group. Most of those guys will tend to be more force or even power dominant, but they'll struggle with elastic energy. But saying that, we have some of our forwards here that will, pretty much fit that description I just gave for more force dominant people, and they're like very explosive, very reactive, very coordinated. So And on the other side of that, we have some of our backs here that do actually struggle with that more like high speed coordination, reactivity side of things. So yeah, it's a bit all over the shop in league in terms of position. Really, it's not as easy probably as union, where you don't expect a prop to give you a.
If you're anything like me, you're short on time. Kids, family, work, training, and having to cook meals on top of that is just not going to happen. So I'm happy to announce Trifecta Nutrition are sponsoring the podcast. You get epic meals like these ones: turkey taco bowl, Texas barbecue protein plate. These are a couple of my favorites. But it means you don't have to prepare all your own meals, and it makes getting and good nutrition relatively easy. I've tried other meal delivery companies. Most of them are too high fat, not enough carbohydrates, or if you're getting kits where you have to cook it yourself, the portions for two is actually for one, especially if you are like me and you're training often. So if you want to take something off your plate and have meals like this delivered to your door, go down the description. There's a link there where you can order Trifecta meals. This is the performance line, which are higher protein and higher carbohydrate. And you can use code LIFTBIG40. You'll get 40% off your first order.
Amazing jump, you know?
Yeah, the game's changed so much now. Like, it's so fast. You've got less interchanges than back in the day. So everyone has to be able to play a lot of minutes. And you see the body shape changes from like 10 plus years ago to now. You don't have the massive fat dudes coming off the bench who just run it straight, from the kickoff anymore. Everyone plays it off.
Ever since they've introduced that 6 again rule a few years back, like instead of getting penalties, you get 6 again on a big part of the pitch. That just sped up the game so much. Like you actually need that sort of ability to move all the time. So yeah, the big dudes paying a bit the price for it, unfortunately for them.
So you mentioned like the timing and coordination and rhythm that some guys possess or some guys don't possess. Say you have one of these guys, they have good numbers on their hang clean high pull, don't have kind of that reactive rebound jump. How are you then building in some of this timing and coordination work? Because it sounds, as soon as I hear timing and coordination, it almost brings me to like Franz Bosch coordination kind of training, or even you could even go more, I guess, mechanical, where you're looking at different things within sprinting. But it'd be interesting to kind of hear how you're addressing some of that.
Yeah, that's a big inspiration in Franz Bosch and all that, sort of line of theory, and that's impacting what we're trying to do with those guys. But we try to keep it quite simple. Often, like it's more okay. If they lack some coordination or rhythm, what are the movement pattern where this might be a performance issue? And still, rugby is a running sport. But at the end of the day, like you have to look at what you need to do to run, especially run at high speed, because every action that have a meaningful impact on the game result nowadays happen at speed. There is not much like low intensity action that are a determining factor. And then taking some of those principles and see how you can help those guys at least regaining or improving coordination around those type of movements. So, something that's linked to a lamb switch is one we go to a lot. So can you switch? Can you switch with a lot of reactivity in there? So we'll have some step up variation, pretty much some inspire from Franz Bosch, but can be have a mid-chin height sort of box and starting 1 foot above that box, ready to attack it. And then as you attack that box, you have that lamb exchange, or you can start on the box and have a double lamb exchange. You can add a med ball. A med ball can be pushed overhead, forward to add a little bit of constraint and perturbation and progress that movement. So we play a lot with that sort of idea of can you be coordinated and produce power when exchanging the lambs? And then another one would be what happens when you contact the ground. So just make sure, like in terms of that ankle, foot stiffness, we can get some improvements. So those guys will go through a fair bit of, drop jump variation. For instance, like steel pogos, hop, running drills, running mechanics, anything that we can add on to their training that will help them just being efficient in recycling energy in a running context. We feel like that's where we're getting gains rather than try to get coordination through movement that are not exactly transferable to the activity straight away. So nothing extremely fancy, but we're fortunate enough to have output units here as a sort of velocity-based tracker. And because you can stick that pretty much wherever you want, it's pretty easy to try to get some objective even when you go through low load coordination type exercise.
It's one of the things I really liked. Like a lot of people will shit on like kind of like a Franz Bosch coordination approach because it's like, hey, it's not measurable. Like we can't see the outcomes on the side. No one has been great just doing these exercises. I found similar like to you, like what I really like about it is for me, it linked what was happening in the gym to what's happening on the field. So like even like the cueing will be similar. So it means like your step down switch, like you're trying to maintain that stiff landing when you hit the ground and that pop. And then when they're going on the field, and maybe even you're doing some more constrained stuff there, like wickets or whatever else, upload dissociation, you can still that it's like you've drilled it twice now in a day versus only doing it once on the field and everything in the gym is just separate. It kind of links it together. It makes it a little more sticky, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if you found something similar.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely agree. Like it's probably like where everyone starts. In our industry around like Bosch IDs, and there is a lot of interesting things. But when it comes to we need to be measurable. We need to have some objectivity around what we're doing, and be able to put progression on paper for people. But I do believe with technology you have around the place, if you know what you're looking for, then you can answer those type of questions. So in a lot of those coordination exercise, coming from Franz Bosch or the one we've applied in the gym, you usually look for one of two things, whether you want to increase your thigh angular velocity, whether being in the flexion phase or the extension phase. And that's anything that you will do around switching. That's probably what you want to look at, is how fast you can get that thigh to come high to create space so you can attack the ground and apply plenty of force that's going to move you forward. Or oppositely, maybe you want to look at how fast that thigh can come down and create massive ground contact forces. And once again, with technology we have in place now being output, or I'm sure there is other one out there, you have ways to play around that. You can measure angular velocity on certain lift, and you can start like building your own database and your own way of tracking and progressing people. So I think you need to like try to look past those limitations. And I know a lot of people are really good with just visualizing stuff as well. Like if you record people and you look at how they move, and you can see your progression. That's especially true with everything you do on the pitch. So I don't think that argument of it's not really measurable, then we leave it on the side is really valid nowadays when it comes to that coordination based stuff.
So you're almost measuring the speed of the switch then with that device?
Yeah, that's it. You can measure like the speed of the switch. Like the way you would picture it is just like your thigh will move, and it will move a certain number of degree per second, and that's probably like your best objective marker to look at. And if you look at like the work of all the really high quality speed coaches out there nowadays, people can find a lot of research and argument around that, like whip happening from the hip being like a key critical factor in preventing injuries on one side, but as well in progressing speed. So if you can get that in the gym somehow, and you can get some data somehow, I think that's only going to be valuable.
That's awesome. And you mentioned as well with the repeated kind of movement jump, and I think you had some random thought posts on the eccentric qualities too. Are you looking at? You mentioned obviously RSI. Are you looking deeper into the eccentric, phases on those jumps then?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Yeah, look, what we've started looking at is it's more like global around the program, is that feeling that a lot of things that cost people readiness or cost people energy or make people like find in a bit of a hole are all around things that produce high eccentric loading rather than concentric output. So you get contact, you have to absorb contact in a sport like rugby league. That's a huge eccentric demand. You have to accel and decel a lot. That's another huge eccentric demand. So the idea of bringing that counter movement rebound jump instead of just a counter movement jump in the program and doing weekly is we can observe the eccentric marker on the jump, and we can see how they are linked to the eccentric loading we have across a week. So funny enough, like I think we spend a lot of time thinking about output, and we spend a lot of time looking at stuff like jump height, but that's probably the last marker that is going to show you any meaningful changes. When that changes, like you're pretty much in the shit already, or there is an obvious reason behind it. What you want to be able to use in monitoring and capture early is probably the variation in your eccentric data. So your eccentric peak forces, your eccentric rate of force development, even the time to go down and initiate the jump, fast people are ready to go down and catch at the bottom of a jump. We spend a lot more time exploring those, and we find them a lot more related to the actual readiness of players than more output concentric based metric like a jump height or peak power or those kind of things.
How are you tracking that week to week? Are you just like Z scoring it and then looking at kind of like daily averages?
Yep. So we use individual Z score. We have our sports scientists here. We put like some pretty decent dashboard, and everything is coded. And so we jump every single week. We look at variation at the individual level and at the team level as well, like trying to picture, what's happening. If that goes down on team level as well, is that because we've lost some of our best jumper, they didn't jump for whatever reason this week? Is that because, there is a general fatigue across the squad? Did that correlate with as higher number on the pitch of accel, decel, or just higher volume for the week? What can we do on the back of that to try to reestablish some neuromuscular readiness going into the game? So, but yeah, we would look like any other data here. We'll have Z score at the individual level. Any variation that's sort of above 1 to 1.5 standard deviation here, we'll start looking at it. And pretty much our approach to all monitoring stuff here is we're never going to act on a single factor. So we're going to wait to see a bit of a picture. So if that goes down and then a couple other things in the training program for the week show warning for the same individual, then we start having a picture and we're probably going to be acting on it.
For the listeners, do you want to maybe just describe or explain what you may see if someone is maybe fatigued going into that? Like what kind of data you'd see in that eccentric phase?
Yeah. So sometimes you might just see, so if you're just looking, people go through the jump, usually there is probably like two things that happen. First is what is their body language and their chat going into the platform. Find like funnily, like when people start like being over chatty a bit, you've got those guys that are coming around the platform a few times and they come have a look, but they're not jumping yet, and they come back and they have a few words and then they go away, and something is happening here because we display their number in real time, so everyone can look at the screen and see people's jump. So if you start picking up a bit of performance anxiety around the jump, you already know you might get something, in there. And then I think you can picture a lot in how fast people are ready to go down in that type of jumps. I feel like still with rugby athlete, like you deal with fairly powerful, more elastic sort of people, not power lifters. So nobody is ever going to take a long time at the bottom of a jump to try to go really high. They all rely fairly on elastic energy. So if guys do not want to go fast on the way down to initiate the jump, usually that when you track the data back, after the jump, you're going to see some changes here. But for all eccentric data, usually you have to go through the processing of the data, and look into it. Sometimes it's not that obvious. You have people who can jump at the same height or higher than usual, but their eccentric peak forces were lower, or their rate of force development eccentrically was lower. So it might tell you that, okay, people always find a way with concentric aspect of stuff with output. You can motivate yourself, you can talk shit to some people around you and they talk shit back at you, and then now you're pumped. Or you can, change your strategy, or you can find a way to produce output. And they're world class at finding a way through fatigue, through injury, to get good output. That's why they are where they are, as top level athlete. But you cannot cheat your eccentric value. If that's not up to what it is, it tells us something is happening at the neuromuscular level, which is not the easiest one to catch on often.
Nice. Yeah, actually, I had a LinkedIn post a few weeks ago saying exactly what you said there. It says we focus so much on the outputs like jump height, VO2 max, etc., but we don't focus on how we get there. And like understandable that not everyone has the technology and shit to be able to do it, but if you do, then there's definite value like you're doing there for monitoring and profiling and all that, and to get a far better picture than just seeing some guy jumps X amount of centimeters and then you go, what do I do? What do I do with that
data? That's a very true comment. I do feel the same. I feel like we became almost like data driven in a lot of ways, and I don't know if we dealt properly with the fact that we're still looking at human and the body is not a machine. Like whoever argue that the body works like a machine, I believe has like, a wrong picture in their head. Like there's too much stuff going on. Any mechanism that happen has so many, if you don't contextualize everything all the time, I think you have a meaningless action on what people can do. Or so yeah, and to get that context, you need to look at movement quality, or you need to look at how things are done, and not just the output. But the output is what keeps us in jobs. It's good as a strength coach.
Yep.
Yes, everyone increase our strength, so I'm doing well. So it's
Yep.
probably entitled to another big question, which are what are the KPI for athletic performance professional? Because if your KPI in your organization are on numbers, then those people are not in a place to actually do their job well and look at quality. They've got to give you numbers.
Yeah, I'm on board with you there, 100%. I actually wanted to go into one of your articles. I just saw you had this article on Simply Fast because I was writing a worst case scenario article recently for Hammer Media. And I'd love to go through for my own selfish reasons to go to worst case scenario. Because the way I implemented it, I don't think I did it well. And so basically, all I did was I took peak periods in the games of 2, 3, or 5 minutes, and I just had the squad average of meters per minute. And then we just literally just fucking, blocks of 2, 3 minutes, and we would just run through the structures in like an opposed session and essentially try and exceed that by 30%. Now, obviously, you can go way more in detail and go like per position, and you can look at different scenarios. And obviously, you can go into more with worst case scenario where you're like, hey, captain gets sent off, now let the team organize themselves, all that kind of shit. So it'd be really interesting to kind of go through how do you approach worst case scenario so I can learn and make my shit better.
I can promise that. I'll try. I think it's a cool topic. Like back then, I think I played around like, again, a bit of semantic, but I find funny how, that just, it was a few years back, and the idea of worst case scenario just popped up and everyone was just talking about worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And once again, when we go back to adding context and stuff, it's like, probably if you have a very good picture in your mind of what that looks like, it's probably not your worst case scenario. Like your worst case scenario is not going to knock on the door and be, hey, that's me, you know me. We've been through this many times before, so let's just, roll through. What it is now, it's probably like if you take worst case scenario in the military sense, or in people what would deal with major emergency sort of situation, like you've got to be looking at something that's going to go beyond what you believe is possible. And worst case scenario for someone, looking at world economy, and a worst case scenario looking at, someone looking at human cost, or they're going to be different. So when it applies to us as well, like your worst case scenario is at a worst case scenario in terms of the physiology of the player, is at a worst case scenario in terms of the psychological pressure, or there is a lot of context that can go into it. So I think ever since like people got a bit better at being a bit more precise, and now we have that idea of ball in play that is quite predominantly the one we go to. So I think most people, when they talk about worst case scenario, they actually refer to ball in play in team sports, which is basically what is the longest period of time the ball is going to be in movement without any stoppages. And the way people look at that nowadays is by going for rolling average of games. You can take a chunk of game being like a full season, 2 season, 10 games, whatever works for your organization, and then roll for every game periods of 30 seconds, 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever you need in your sport, until you find that sort of like worst case scenario. What is the longest ball in play time your players might be facing? And that's a starting point. So looking at this one allows easy translation for coaches, and it allows easy integration to training. So now if you want to overload your, let's say, worst case scenario, you just have to come up with a drill that's going to trigger a similar density and a similar intensity that you find in your worst case scenario ball in play. So that could be, let's say, for us, I don't have the exact number in mind, but let's say you find out that, okay, the worst we're going to ever go through is 8 minutes non-stop, and that's going to produce about like 120 meters per minute. and we're going to find about that number of accel decel in that quantity of time. Can you replicate that in your training session? And as you said before, do you want to go even above and beyond and overload that? So go not 100% of your worst case scenario, but like 110 or 120, 130% of it. So that's probably like one way to look at worst case scenario. But I feel like the other side of it is probably the worst case scenario is going to be individual at the end of the day. Like my worst case scenario is probably going to be different than yours or different than the third person, depending on what we are good at, what we associate psychologically to good outcome, or things that might be feeling good and feeling bad. To someone who's just loving the defense, love contact, like going through for a repeated set, or for another sport, let's say you are stuck on your defensive line and you have to absorb pressure for maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes in a row. That might be really enjoyable for that person. It might not be at all a worst case scenario. It might just be where he actually knows that's his time to shine. And yes, maybe the numbers might still be like his highest for whatever is it that you're looking at, but emotionally, psychologically, and then physiologically at the end of the day, because you cannot separate brain and muscle, or brain and lactate level, and it's actually not that hard for him. But maybe you go on the other side and the ball is being kicked from one side to another and he has to shuffle in the middle. That might just be like low intensity work for you. Looking at your GPS might be something he absolutely despise, and that might be where his lactate level just blows, where you feel like he's about to give up pretty much. So I feel like you have to go, and it takes a bit of time to look at not just the GPS but the individual profile, what they're good at, what they're bad at, to actually have a good picture of what is a worst case scenario. And then if you're willing to do that, then you can overload that part of a game for someone. If you can find drill where you get a group of people and they absolutely don't want to do that drill, you're probably not far off what you're looking at here. So yeah, that's a bit like I think the two sides of a worst case scenario. So I think a bit of semantic, a bit of precision helps if you're looking at a ball in play things, because you want a collective marker that you can overload. I think people do that pretty well nowadays. Look at your ball in play and then decide how much you want to overload it and over what time frame. But if you want to go into actual worst case scenario, you can be a bit more inventive. Stuff like, have you prepared to be a man down, and have to defend, or have you prepared to be 2 man down and have to defend? Have you practiced some drill with limited vision? So back at the Roosters, sometimes we had a fun drill going on where we had some people being eye banded, so they couldn't see. And some people having earplugs, so they couldn't hear, and they had to find a way to get stuff going. So between the people who could not hear communication and the people who couldn't see stuff, they still had to go through their line. And I think that's a fun way to explore that concept of worst case. Can you find new resources when you're going to need them?
No, I love that. I want to start with the kind of collective aspect. Do you find that meters per minute and accels and decels are, I guess, the metrics, the better or best metrics to use for quantifying a worst case scenario?
No, great question. I would say that probably you go back to your sport and what makes sense to you, because at the end of the day, like having clarity, alignment, and quality of communication between athletic performance staff and coaching staff is something extremely important. So you need to find something that's going to work for both. And sometimes meters per minute is neither one for everyone to understand. However, I would say people need to understand that meters per minute are not an intensity marker. So if you're using to try to describe any intensity, I think you're going the wrong way. It's a density marker. It just tells you about the movement happening around certain unit of time. Or you achieved, back to context, back to the quality aspect of things, or you achieve that meters per minute can be meaning a lot of different things physiologically or on the neuromuscular level. If I do 200 meters per minute, did I do 200 meter in 30 seconds and then lie down on the field for another 30 seconds? Or did I move at, a decent speed to give me that average over a certain period of time? Did I move at 400 meters per minute for some time and then did nothing? Or did I stay around 200 meters? Or what's been the deal around that? I think that's important to picture. That's only going to be density. You need to go and have another layer. to tell you about actual intensity around what people are doing on the pitch. Accel, decel, depend on your sport. For us in rugby league, that's a big one. Players do accel and decel a lot because they have to be back 10 meters to defend. So the way the game goes, you have those shuttle of accelerating R being back in the line, decelerating R to be in position, reaccelerating to go into contact. So for us, that's probably the best intensity marker we can get. If people, accumulate a huge load of accel decel, we can be pretty confident that's going to translate into soreness, that's going to translate into fatigue. That's going to have an impact on what the players can do the following week, or, we need to manage him. More so probably than meters per minute. Even though rugby league is quite continuous, once again, you're talking about a sport that can easily have over 50 minutes of ball in play time over a game. So, I think if you transfer to rugby union, I would say I would just back the meters per minute. I would say that's just a rubbish metric because of the context of the game being a lot more neural, a lot more just short, sharp action and followed by bigger period of recovery. I don't think that would give me anything. In league, because of the continuous nature of the game, you probably get a bit more from that marker. But I think, once again, you cannot go off one. Probably you need to paint a picture. Accel decel on top of meters per minute, or accel decel per minute, start giving you a bit of an idea of what's going on.
Nice. And then I guess if you're on Catapult, I'm sure other systems could probably do it, but I guess their player load might give you a little more just because it's at least 3-dimensional. And then I guess, do you also plan to maybe contacts per minute for like defensive worst case scenario? Is that something else that you also employ there?
I think it would be very good to do. We don't do it as much. I think the technology is in terms of like giving you quality data around contact is tough. It's still difficult. So I know player load is trying to integrate some of those contact or collision data, but in a general sense, I do prefer to stay away. And I think that's something that's true across the Warriors high performance staff. We do like staying away from black box, something that we are not fully, we don't have the full understanding of, because whenever it's filtered through a specific algorithm, all different things are weighted differently. I think you lose a little bit of context once again. Probably better to come up and do your own stuff, your own marker or your own algorithm that you feel like you have a good control over. But yeah, like the collision side of things would probably, you get a lot from just the rugby analysis of what the analysis staff is doing and reporting the number of collision per player, their stats around rucks and all of that will give you the picture around that collision component. And then you might focus more on the locomotor component when you look at GPSs.
Nice. I actually wanted to also go through, I saw you had some interesting stuff on conditioning, and we've covered so much on this podcast and various pieces of content around peripherally biasing conditioning, so we have better oxygen use and oxygen resaturation, because most conditioning, I guess, philosophies or content is centered around kind of like this aerobic, anaerobic bucket, and it kind of doesn't really make sense physiology. And I really liked how you put together this idea of, what is happening at the muscle is going to dictate kind of like that recovery aspect. So we're going to kind of dive into what you're finding there, how you're using the NAIRS devices with your players, and then just some overall general conditioning stuff with how you're taking that data and then, I guess, using it to individually improve, or what you're seeing from this data to actually influence some of that conditioning.
Yeah, very interesting one. Look, and I think like you had in your podcast, I hope I'm not gonna get his name wrong, but Andrew Usher, I think.
Yep.
It is, a lot of data is like his studies, and I think people need to go and listen to that one. That's really interesting, and a lot of what you say around that reoxygenation and all of that, like it probably be like world class person to talk about it a lot better than I can do. But the idea
I love to hear how people are applying it though. So I need you to go into it.
So the thing is, we do not have the technology in house here, so that's something like we want to look at in the future. I did play a little bit with heart rate over in Ireland, just in terms of that heart rate recovery at 60 seconds as a proxy for it. But of course, like now people have actually NIRS devices, like I think Train Red is one of them, or Moxie, or that you can have. And I think there's some detail you can gather through the use of those technology. But right now we don't have it in-house. We don't have it on the field to try to really drive objective marker. Though the idea around that is, yes, as you said, like a lot of time when we talk about fitness, we always talk about like the central adaptation linked to fitness, or the systemic adaptation linked to fitness, so VO2 max, that kind of stuff. But not that much about what's happening on the peripheral level. And in our sport, where the target, like for me, the definition of fitness in repeat high intensity sports such as rugby league are how fast are you ready to produce your next effort? And is that effort going to still be quality? That's probably fitness. If you can get back in position early, ready to do your job and do it well with the right level of intent, and do that over and over and over again, I believe you'll be considered as a fit player. And not, if you can be running around the pitch for the entire 80 minutes and not struggle, I don't think we're very much interested in that. And a lot of what's happening to be able to repeat those efforts are going to be happening at a peripheral level, at the muscular level. How much oxygen can you uptake? Because that's going to drive, how much phosphocreatine can you use, and some of those metabolic produce that are needed to get the action going, to do the muscular action that you need to do. So in the future, I believe a lot of conditioning is going to be looking at actually what needs to be done to get oxygen back into key critical muscle faster, as a way to progress fitness more so than traditional VO2 max related or MIS related method. And if you don't have any technology in place, we found like some proxy, once again, looking at your heart rate recovery over 60 seconds. At the 60-second mark, if you do go through really high intensity effort, and you can play around on a watt bike, let's say 6-second sprints, for instance, and then you have someone with a heart rate monitor on, and you start like looking at where they end up 60 seconds after the effort, or 45 seconds after the effort, whatever works best for your sport. And then you train them and you see that heart rate coming down at that point in time. There is some reason to believe that somewhere that ability to uptake oxygen is getting better. And by proxy, you might think whatever muscle you are involving the most in that effort might be the one benefiting from that adaptation, even though you don't have a real way to look into the muscle. But yeah, to answer your question, I think like in a couple of years' time, like there'll be a lot more reoxygenation driven conditioning method and technology being in place in club. Right now, it's a bit an exploratory period for it. But I would do encourage people to have a look at, if they can get those technology in place, and they have their own like limitation. And you probably need to develop a certain expertise looking at it. It's not as easy as just putting like the monitor on your quad and then straight away having answers. But yeah, like what's happening at the peripheral level, or at least getting in the habit of training peripheral fatigue, is going to be a really huge one. And I do think another aspect where it's going to be impacting what we do in practice is around like return to play after injuries. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, let's say after a hamstring injury, you might see people like regaining their eccentric strength on the Nordic, or regaining their max velocity potential on the pitch. But now, if you ask them to repeat those efforts, I believe there is some work being done in US right now, where in American football, where it's reported that when people go through repeat sprinting protocol, on coming back from a hamstring injury, the ability of hamstring muscle to uptake oxygen is impaired and stay impaired for a long time. And now when we get people re-injury their hamstring late in games, and we got all our objective marker green lighted, validated prior to them getting back into the activity, and we just say, is that bad luck, or what we did wrong? Or sometimes maybe we're just missing a small piece of that puzzle, which is if your muscle is not able to uptake oxygen with the same efficiency anymore, maybe you're good on the first sprint, like you're nailing your 90% plus of speed or whatever. But on the second sprint, your hamstring is already, struggling to get what it needs here metabolically to do the job. But then now it's minute 70 or minute 75 into an 80-minute game, and you've got to go and sprint, or you've got to have like a fast decel, or and there is just no oxygen anymore available in the muscle to do that sort of job, and that's where you run into issues. So I think that's an additional piece of puzzle that's going to come up on top of what we do RTP wise once those technology are more in place.
Nice. So currently, then, without the technology and everything, how are you skewing, changing, altering conditioning at all then to have something that's a little more like muscular bias versus maybe your more MAS VO2 max intervals?
Yeah, very good question. Look, we try to play with some, off feet sometimes. So what kind of modalities we can put in place to target some specific area, and are they going to be able to repeat effort? So it might be, if your concern was upper body conditioning, in a way, because we always talk about like what the legs are doing, but in sport like rugby league, or I'm sure in combat, like you need endurance at the shoulder level as well. You need endurance, at the upper body level to be able to repeat collisions, repeat grappling action. So, things like protocol that you will do on a watt bike, but transferring them to battle rope to actually grappling. So we do a lot of wrestle here. So wrestle conditioning, getting people to grapple for sets of time, looking at things like dumbbell variation of a man maker, or a clean into a push, that sort of things where we're going to try to get a huge volume of reps with limited recovery to try to build up that ability to reoxygenate faster and to produce effort for a longer period of time. So that's one way we approach it. We have some, ergs. Sometimes we play with arm-only isobike effort, arm-only ski erg effort. If you want to target upper body conditioning, nothing like groundbreaking, like wow, out of this world in terms of the science, just stuff that you can apply on the pitch when you have 35 people and conditioning or gym is only a small part of their day. Just go straight to the point, keep it simple, I think is a good one. And then if you have the technology to back up stuff and be better and progress stuff further, then go for it. But in our reality of team sports environment, we try to keep it simple when it comes to conditioning. And then if you want to look at hamstring, you might look and find a hinge in there, or a sled variation, sled pull variation, sled push variation, that is targeting your hamstring, and try to deplete your hamstring that way. Even though probably the best way to do that is going through some run interval on the pitch where you can actually go and target that posterior chain. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's probably like how we try to approach it.
Nice. You have one of like the longest preseasons probably of any sport, and in most different leagues, it's like 3.5, 4 months. How do you look to kind of periodize that conditioning then through that long stretch?
Yeah, it's like true. It's almost like, it's a big challenge here when you get 16 weeks of preseason. I find like that the line between how much is meaningful for people to get ready to play and how much is just fatiguing them. And it's probably an unnecessary load before going into a season that's still like 8 months long. Yeah, it's an interesting one. Look, I'd say, and that's more like my vision around things lately in terms of conditioning. I do feel like it is time we question or we sequence things throughout the preseason when it comes to running volume. And what I mean by that is, lately, and a lot of what I'm going to say are maybe more driven by my work with Irish rugby and the sevens over there than it is with league. And that's more due to, some of the things that are part of where I have a lead here are different than, when I was at the Irish Sevens. So in terms of what I could explore personally, they're a bit different. But what I mean by that is probably the number one priority when you get people back in preseason is, can you restore coordination, reason, and can you go back to a decent neuromuscular health level before you do anything else? I find that myself included, like a lot of practitioners, traditionally always approached preseason as being, you come back and you need to get flogged. Or otherwise, this is not a preseason. If you don't go the first 2 weeks,
I have seen some brutal ones, and I'm always like, dude, like these guys just came back. You've got how long? Like, why do they need to do this? And then you see guys playing up with injuries and shit, and you're like,
that's it. That's true. Like, and even if you have shorter preseason, like it's the case in Union nowadays, I think this still applies. I think that culturally getting people back and getting them through 3 Broncos in the first week and huge MIS work and stuff like that. I don't think that helps. The reason being, like, they're probably not yet coordinated, and they are not yet in a neuromuscular state that will allow them to practice that sort of load safely. People have been off, people have been on holidays, and if you look at the time it takes for different qualities to deplete or to be lost, anything that's more on the quality end of things, anything that's around speed, coordination, neuromuscular efficiency, that is gone the quickest. Your endurance, your strength, you can hold on to that for a lot longer. So I don't know why or where is that rush of pushing on those straight away when you probably should attack first on what is it that you probably lost the most between the end of the previous season and the start of that season. Getting people through a lot of drilling, a lot of skipping, a lot of running that requires good posture, good ground contact, good pelvic position. All of that, I think, should be our priority when you return to preseason. Get a lot of that done. You can get people suffer through high-level drilling, high-load sort of running drills sort of thing. And only when they're getting back to a proper way of moving and a proper postural attitude around running, then you can go and progress your volume. But even then, I think you can ask yourself the question, when is that like huge volume approach is actually needed? I think as soon as you see people changing their mechanics just to get through the volume of running you're asking them to do, you've got to go back and think, are those posture what I'm going to look for in a few weeks' time when we're back and playing the game? Is that the way I want to see people behaving and operating? If it's not, then there might be a question here of, do you actually get anything from that volume you're trying to build here? If the running goes to shit, to say it straightly. But so going back to this, I would actually structure things the other way around. So try to go from speed development into repeatability of that speed that you now have access to, rather than looking at a high volume, trimming it down to your speed or high intensity repeated effort over a preseason. Drill first, then start repeating axle, then extend those axle to high speed running. Try to get high speed running with quality, repeat those effort, increase duration or increase distance, and then that's so you gather some volume that you need, in terms of getting people fit. And if you go back through the work of Andrew Usher and other people around that reoxygenation and all of that, we know now, yeah, that you can develop really good aerobic fitness through repeat sprinting and repeat high intensity effort. You do not need to go through the classic high load aerobic sort of thing.
I wish more people would just take that one thing.
Yeah, look, it's hard because sometimes when you go and challenge some stuff that have been done in the culture for years and years and years and years, it is hard to extract yourself from that weight and actually go and look, okay, is that actually what's best for people here? And I have to say, like, whenever I see someone trying to finish like an extensive run drill in preseason and they're all like bended over, their ground contact time is so long and they're just, suffering through. And that guy you're looking at is your fast twitch, game changer winger that you want him to be able to be absolutely on from 0 to 100 straight away. And you're just like, what are you doing here? You're absolutely destroying that guy. You're putting in position that is not made to operate in. And you're not creating adaptation here that are going to be useful to him. You're better off just, let him repeat sprint, let him move the way he moves with good positioning, and he will give you transfer when it matters.
Nice. We're on the same wavelength with that. Like Vern Gambetta, who's a mentor of mine, he as he always says with his training structures, like train speed in. And it's something I always took as well. Like, as you mentioned with the postures, kind of like the options, running position, being able to have options when you're running. So building that into the session and progressing it through the preseason or off season, however long you have, so you're able to just continually drill those good postures while you're doing it. And again, so they're not just slogging like this the whole time trying to get through it. Like you're accumulating good volume like over time, and then you're able to actually like it just makes this. It also makes the session more enjoyable for the players, and then they start to think like they understand. They're not just getting flogged for getting flogged. Like players, there's some players that there's some players that absolutely love it. There's some mental fucking athletes out there that will love just getting fucking whipped down the field. But a lot of them, like they want to do things and understand like what they're doing is going to help them, not just fuck them up. And it's like it's such a big change, and players like buy into it quite well. Especially like guys who maybe had previous injuries and they're saying like, "Oh, I don't feel so beat up anymore. Like my knees are." You know, I hear players be like, man, it's like the first season, like my knees aren't like killing him. He can actually play. It's just like a change in volume and things. You know, it's such a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, I think I could see. Yeah, and yeah, and the argument around like well, you might not be able to do a lot of drilling or stuff with your heavier forwards and so how do you deal with that calf or hamstring load if you want extra conditioning? And that's where I think as well, like all your off-fit stuff come in the picture as well. Like we always come from that idea that whatever you do on a bike or it's not transferring to what's happening on the pitch. If we go back to what we talked about before and you target the right muscle and you think in terms of that reoxygenation piece, I believe you can get a lot of benefit from what you do off-fit if you do it smartly, and that can contribute to what you do on the pitch. Where it doesn't work is if you get people to do conditioning off it and then you do something that's not high quality driven on the pitch, then you can get into trouble. But if everything you do on the pitch is going to be in the right posture, gonna teach people hip extension, gonna teach people how to strike midfoot, how to get good posture in running, then I think you start getting that transfer. Like you get your systemic adaptation or your very local peripheral adaptation for what you're doing on a bike or off it, and then you save your neuromuscular potential for high quality stuff whenever you take it into the running, because at the end of the day in running sport, you're going to want people to run in good posture, to run fast when it's going to matter the most, not just be, endurance machine going around, but with no real meaning. And the cool thing with that as well is, as you said, like some people like different things. And I think with, all that research that's came lately around anaerobic speed reserve and decided that, okay, you can look at grouping people when it comes to conditioning as well. You don't have to have the same conditioning protocol for everyone. That's what I did. So all leading into the Olympics with the Irish Sevens, our entire preseason, everything we did conditioning from day one pretty much is high profile players. And then I went, okay, you guys are my fast explosive weapon, and I'm going to keep it that way. And then you guys are the guys on the pitch who are going to travel a lot. We're going to do a lot of that, like sort of high volume running, and you build for it. So we're going to push on this. And then they had complete different running demand from day one. All the fast guy, very explosive, fast twitch, did only some sort of repeat, sprinting protocol in very various form. We went heels, we went repeated effort involving like collision as well on top of sprint. We progressed it all the way through, but they never ever did anything that looks like MIS or tempo. On the other side, the other guys who enjoy the volume a bit more, we need that a bit more, usually because they're a bit more slow twitch. They probably reoxygenate a bit faster. They have a less high neural inhibition after very intense effort because they're not that fast twitch, that maximal sort of athlete. We did a bit more long tempo stuff, tempo into repeated high intensity effort, a bit longer effort, and then it all combined perfectly. And there is other factor into this, but to this day, I still believe we went 10 months without a single muscle injury. Nice. And in my entire career, I've never gone 10 months without a non-contact, injury. And there's been other stuff, a lot of people doing an excellent job around the program, and all our robustness in the gym contributing to that. But I still believe to that day that having just conditioned people through what they are made physiologically and biomechanically to do, and not forcing them into the wrong posture, just to survive some load that I decided to put through them definitely was a big contributor of us being healthy for almost the entire prep to the Olympics.
I love that. Love that. I think I had 2 weeks to prep our Romania sevens for the Olympic trials straight after a 15 season. And it was fucked, put it that way. But
Yeah,
I know
that's both.
I know you got to shoot off soon, Pierre. So where can people find and follow you?
Look, pretty open. I usually try to reply to everyone. I love like conversation. I'm on LinkedIn under my name, so Pierre Austrey. Instagram as well. I do. Have a bit of professional stuff in there as well if people want to reach out. Yeah, so I'm quite easy. I don't really have I don't have like what the other stuff. Twitter. Is that still called Twitter? Fuck, I'm getting old.
I still call it Twitter, but it's called X now.
yeah, none of that. So probably like LinkedIn, probably the best one, and then Instagram is another one, and so like my name. So
sweet. I'll link those in the description for anyone who wants to catch you. But I appreciate you coming on. I've really enjoyed this. Even though it wasn't exactly combat sports, I didn't give a shit because this is I enjoyed this, and there's always concepts that relate back to all training, all sport kind of shares the same principle. So I appreciate you coming on.
No, thanks for the invite, Luke. I'm not very much a combat person. I don't know much about it, but I think the main thing for me that you can always apply is look for context. That'll be the main thing. Like whatever you do, like try to look for context. And then once you answer the first question, make sure you have a second question. And once it's answered, make sure you have a third one. And then you start like looking at things in a better way. Sometimes we just stop at the first metric that looks cool, or the first question is answered, and that's where we stopped. And I think there is always more, more context to put into what we're doing.
No, perfect. No, I appreciate that. Yeah, and we'll stay in touch anyway.
Thank you very much, James, and talk soon.